Hello, everybody. Just about ready to get started. But before we go into yet another Suikoden, we have to get our final thoughts out of the way. And I'm going to be honest with you, this game was very difficult for me to decide where things would land. But before we do that, let's see if the command works. Wah! Good, the wah works. Wah, there we go. Welcome, Chris. This is a game, I feel like I've said this before in a couple of different final thoughts, where if you had asked me how I felt at the beginning of the game versus the end of the game, I would give very different responses. So, man, where to gather myself? I guess we'll start at the beginning first versus an overall. So, starting off the game, I knew this would be the last in the main series. That's about all I knew going into it. I had heard mostly positive things from people that had played the game before, but I had not otherwise seen the game played before. I did not watch speedruns of the game before. I did not look up things for the game before, tentative of like the Star of Destiny count. That's it. So kind of coming into this game, wasn't sure what to expect. 4 was a little rough at points. 3 was very unpolished, I would say. And I would say for the first 6 or 7 hours of the game, I had very mixed feelings. I feel like it's very slow going in the beginning. It takes a lot of risks to try to set up a story exposition, especially starting a flashback that potentially took us, I think, over an hour, which is kind of long for a flashback, to be honest with you. Yeah, it definitely dragged to get into the main portion of Suikoden. I think what helped it is that there were some characters I really liked, like Sialeeds, and there were some characters I really, really hated. I'm looking at you, Lim. I'm looking at you, sister character that I find absolutely irritating, and I was like, thank you. After the 7-hour mark, we're separated from the character. I'm like, thank you. I hate this character. Get this character off the screen. I don't care what the plot reason is. Just move on. And we finally got past that character. Once we got past that character, I started to have fun with the game. I feel like up until that point, combat is kind of slow. You're kind of paired with like really overpowered characters, so it's pretty much like baby mode in the beginning. It's I don't even know if you can die with those characters if you just auto battle all the way through. So that could give some kind of weird impressions to people just trying to get into the game. But I feel like as we got out of that very overextended intro, I think the game really started to shine. I really liked the remaining cast of characters as we're introduced to them. I like the different villains, both the very cartoonishly evil ones, the more subtle evil ones, the greedy ones. Chad had a few favorite that they hated, but in a good way. They hated them in a good way. And I feel like having that variety of villainy kept the game fresh for me. There were a couple betrayals throughout the game, some very, very much expected and predicted, others not so much. And I think, to me, if we look at then, we pull back. We're no longer talking about just the beginning of the game. If we look at it on the whole, I really liked the plot of this game. I feel like this is a lot stronger than the other ones in the series. I feel like the characters were just a lot stronger in general. It helps that there's a lot of dialogue in the game, and to be clear, compared to like Suikoden's like maybe sub 20-hour gameplay, Suikoden 2's sub 20-hour gameplay, this on a first clear for all 108 was over 70 hours. Now, some of it was me messing around, to be fair. I could say at least 5 or 6 hours were just me messing around. Like, not even like a exaggeration. Like, I'm pretty sure that's about how much we messed around. But I feel like because each of the characters seemed to have more to offer to the table, we ended up finding a lot more favorites. So there's a lot of characters in the early games that are kind of like one note, or maybe you get like 3, 4, dialogue boxes with them, and that's all they say for the rest of the game. This game, I feel, integrated the characters extremely well. I think by far it is the best in the series. If you're looking for a cohesive group, I think they pretty much worked all the way through. The character relations made sense. I think you could figure out a lot of the Unite attacks based off of that. Unfortunately, there's always the ones that don't make any sense, but you know, it's classic Suikoden. But I feel like it did a lot of things to make me agreeable with the plot. Combat. It is an action RPG, turn-based. It's still a little slow. Not the slowest in the series. It's a little slow. Yeah, not all United attacks looks can kill. Yeah, exactly. But I feel like it was really fun. They kept a lot of the complexity from earlier games in the series, like 3 and 2, where you had kind of like a revenge mechanic if somebody that they like died, so that way you get enhanced damage. I'm not sure if they protected each other, because that didn't really come up in our playthrough. We were basically either at full health or dead. Most of our characters, except for our tanks. Everybody else was just kind of, we made them glass cannon on purpose. I like the formations. They were kind of annoying at times, where you can, instead of just deciding like 3 people in the front, 3 people in the back, you could form like rings or lines or triangles or squares in order to get stat bonuses and unleash a formation specific attack. I think that was actually a really good addition to the game. Unfortunately, we will probably never see that mechanic again, but I actually really liked it. And I like that you could tailor it based off of the number of surviving party members. If you like going for a low hero challenge, you get some of those eventually. I do feel sad there weren't some lower count ones. We did have a couple of 3s, 4s, and 5s, for example, but I struggle to think if there's like a single formation one, or like two formation 2s, for example. But I do feel like that kept combat kind of fresh. We nicknamed one of them man mode for when we just felt like ending boss encounters. And I think it paid off. Now, to get more involved in the RPG aspect, I mentioned it took parts of 3 in. So all the character skill ranks are back. You can rank them up from basically, I think, D all the way up to S. Welcome, Calvisham. So you could gradually make the characters a little stronger. I will say, for the most part, I like the idea of it, but I feel like the impact was very low. The only ones where I felt like their skills were really important were ones that couldn't really level. Like being able to, for example, use a rune shop in the middle of nowhere is an amazing power to have. Forging was an important one to have, or secret paths, where we could reveal new terrain in the dungeon, which was required for some optional characters. There's some passive bonuses from the support characters that were generally useful. I feel like the support character bonuses were generally a lot better than the active character bonuses, to be honest with you. And I think a lot of the problem stems from the fact that late game, when your stats start going in the 500 and 600 territory, 30 attack really doesn't matter. So I feel like they kind of fell off, unfortunately. I like the idea of it, but I feel like for the most part it fell flat. The only time I really put points into something and I felt like it was amazing and game-changing probably would have been Chain Magic. I think almost everything else was skippable. If I were to replay it again, I don't even think I would bother pointing things up that weren't directly related to money or treasure up, to be honest. I just feel like it wouldn't even be worth time menuing for me. And as I said before, those stat bonuses really don't matter, ultimately, in the long run. So, other than that, I had a lot of fun with the combat. Generally, it was on the easier side of things, and I think the reason is not because the game itself is necessarily, like, pulling punches, but unlike the other Suikodens, it is really easy to get the party that you want. They introduced a mechanic where you could basically have up to 6 active party members and 3 support characters. It's probably one of the best iterations of the party system that we've seen so far in Suikoden. So, for example, if they force me to have plot mandatory characters, I can actually keep them in the convoy, which was a thing in the earlier Suikodens, but not to the number that it was in this game. So if there were 2 or 3 characters I didn't really care about, they could stay in the support system rather than keeping a support character that would buff my characters. but it still had its restrictions. It's classic Suikoden to just kind of annoy the player by randomly wiping your party. I think at one point we were midway through the game and it reset our party like 4 times in a row in the span of 40 minutes. It was really absurd. It was like enter castle, cutscene, lose characters. We got our characters back. Go to war room, cutscene, lose characters. Go get your characters again. Go downstairs, go to bed, lose your characters again. It was kind of annoying. So unfortunately, I don't think they learned their lessons ultimately in the main series with stuff like that. But overall, I think that was a positive feature to be included in the game. And I think that let us kind of play the teams that we wanted, which ultimately I think should be the goal for these style games, where you collect 108 potential characters. It would be nice to actually be able to play the damn characters Suikoden. So we're all gonna roll our eyes when we get those nonsense like 4 or 5 party member required moments. And it's like, but what if I don't like the character Suikoden? Did you think about that? So we talked about formations, a little bit about combat. Runes in this game, I think for the most part, are done very well. I think melee is still probably the most broken option. I think it just scales so much harder than Magic. Sorry, Magic. Magic is somewhat useful against groups, that's about it. But late game, melee becomes better against groups too. So then there's really no reason not to just auto-attack win battle after a while if you're set up for like crazy high damage and multi-strikes and stuff like that. So if you do take advantage of the combat stat mechanics and you do pay attention to those things, I do feel like the game rewards you. I do want to give another shout out again to the characters. So not only are they fun in plot, potentially, or even useful in combat, where I feel like there were way less characters that I would consider bottom tier. Like in a usable party size of at least 55 to 60 characters, I would say only 5 or 6 were like truly bad. I feel like there were a lot of like average ones, but more than half of the cast just felt really good to use. They weren't necessarily interchangeable because some leaned more towards tanky versus melee versus magic, and they did feel distinct enough due to number of rune slots and maybe some innate starting runes that I do feel like the characters actually were different for the most part. But I want to give a special shout out to the portraits of the characters. Long surviving the game itself, we've added a few to the stream already. I really like the variety of portrait emotions that occurred throughout the game. I feel like that really sold, honestly, a lot of the plot, and I really do want to give like an extra shout out to it. Like with even some of the characters that were clearly never going to be playable had upwards of like 6 or 7 expressions, like happy, angry, sad, dying, on deathbed, confused. Like they had like a decent variety for how big the cast is. So I just want to draw attention to that in particular. And I think too, there were several characters that had basically no plot relevance, but I know chat will remember forever. Like, I just have to say words like Rock Beaver or Egbert, and chat will remember those characters for some time. So I will say, compared to the other Suikodens, the character casts in this game are just so much more memorable. Some of it due to the amount of dialogue that they get, but honestly, just overall, the cast was extremely solid, both in combat and in plot and other things. And I do feel like their personalities were varied, which I think helped with the mid-game portion of Suikoden itself. Now, Suikoden is also, as a series, known for having a lot of mini-games. And I will say, overall, most of the mini-games were good. Except one. And unfortunately, chat, this is where the most conflict came in of whether or not I would say I like this game. And then usually I lead really strong with whether or not I like the game. I really, 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 really hated the war battle mechanic in this game. It was my least favorite, hands down, no question. Hated every minute I was in the war battles. They are long, they are tedious, They potentially require a lot of setup. There's a lot of rules you have to remember for it. The combat is slow. The combat forces you to lose control of the characters in an RTS style game, which is absolutely nonsensical that it would take control away from the player in an RTS game. Stupid. I don't know who came up with it, but stupid. Worst part of the game. And unfortunately, if there weren't so many of them, and if they didn't take so long to do, this game would have been an easy recommend. But I'm going to be honest with you, chat. If we're talking about personal bias, I don't think I could play this game again. I liked almost every other portion of this game, but the war battles taking like 6 to 8 hours of the gameplay in a 70-hour run is a really long commitment with how much I did not like them. Because you have to think of it this way. If you don't like something, generally it's like, oh, you know, you'll get through it in 10 minutes. No, there's a lot of them, and they're very long, and several of them are easy to game over on. So you can't just like dummy rush into the enemy and end the combat. So, not a fan, chat. Very, very big weak point of the game. So I'm gonna circle back onto my final opinion a little later before we go into spoiler territory. One thing I will say, though, with trying not to spoil things for the people that are just coming in and were curious about the game, I do feel like the dungeons and the towns were like a little too big in scale. You don't really get a fast movement option, like to physically walk faster until much later in the game. So some of the exploration did feel tedious. In particular, one of the forest levels that was a maze on purpose, mixed with random encounters. We were there for like an hour because we kept going through every possible branching path that was incorrect. And that felt miserable. So some of the dungeon design definitely could have used some work. And there's some very questionable town exits too. Like just literally the starting town. This is not a spoiler. The starting town that you have to revisit at some point only has one exit, even though it blocks off an entire other half of the continent that you need to go to for later in the game. And it's like, then you have to sail to like some arbitrary port city to exit the port city to go towards the location you just came from because you can't exit from the other side. Like that blows my mind. Yeah, that blows my mind. I was just like, I'm like, but why? Why didn't they just have 2 exits in the town? Why is the starting town like 14 screens to go from like the save room to the exit? There's just like little questions like that where, you know, I do feel exploration was on the weak side. I will say for those that are veterans of the series, you do get the teleport earlier than some of the other Suikodens, which is merciful, and that makes the game a lot more playable. But the fast movement is just a little too late into the game. We should not be getting it 3/4 of the way into the game. That should be like 1/4 of the way into the game we should get fast movement. To be honest with you, it should be the inverse of what it was. I guess we'll talk about voice acting. I think the voice acting in the game itself was really solid. There's not like a whole ton of it, but the actual in-game cutscenes are voiced. I will say, we're not at my favorite part of the soundtrack that we're listening to, but the soundtrack was probably the best in the series. I don't say it lightly because I was not a fan of some of the alternate music in the later Suikoden games, but I have to admit, the remixes of the songs from the first game, the general themes for the different areas, a lot of like the castle music, outside of one castle in particular where Will My Eyes at, was really good, and I feel like it set a really good tone and ambiance with the game itself. The soundtrack itself is phenomenally long. In fact, since I have it open, how long is the soundtrack? 8 hours and 22 minutes of soundtrack, which is really long. So I don't feel like outside of 1 or 2 song exceptions, anything was like bad per se. As there's basically a new song for every area, different levels of combat, different portions of the game in combat, different bosses, different story bosses, the war battles, the other mini games, the castle stuff. Tons of songs, so I feel like I kept it pretty fresh. The castle building itself in this game, we didn't really talk about it. It's just kind of assumed you know about it. But you do recruit the 108 characters, which go towards a true ending. If you don't get all of them, obviously you get a different ending. Rock paper overwrites the combat, exactly. But I do feel like the castle for the most part was fun to explore. It wasn't like ultra tedious like it was in, I want to say parts of 2, where there were just rooms that were like way out in the middle of nowhere that didn't make any sense. I feel like for the most part going into that castle blind, I generally knew where things were, and I feel like the shortcuts within that you can unlock made sense. So I'm gonna say overall the castle building was nice. We didn't really get to see a lot of the external castle shots, so I would have said... yeah, that's one of the problems. I would have said maybe I would have liked to have seen the castle a bit more from the outside, like Suikoden 2, for example, let you see it level up, or Suikoden 1 let you see it level up a lot, but we didn't really get to see like the big picture of it. We got to see the after effects of like it gaining new floors and stuff like that, or people shuffling around, but not so much the other components. But yeah, this game was very weird in the sense that there were a lot of places to put like ornaments and paintings and furniture in places that are easily seen that you will revisit throughout the game. But then they decide to only give you 2 painting slots when painting is the most common ornament that you could place. Like, we had like 150 something paintings and only 2 slots for paintings. Like, that to me is bonkers. I don't get why they lowballed it so much. Like, I honestly was waiting the whole time to be like, oh, are we just gonna unlock like a urn rune or a statue room? And we did unlock a statue room at one point. But it's just kind of like one of those things. It just felt like they didn't even hype up their own feature. I'm like, why bother putting in like 50 unique paintings if you can only see 2? Like, at any given time ever. Just find that very strange choice on their part. So, I guess we're kind of concluding the non-spoiler sections. The beginning was a little shaky, the middle, for the most part, was solid, and the ending. Trying not to spoil, but we're going to rant about this in a little bit. That ending was one of the worst endings in, not the actual game ending itself, but the dungeon into the final boss was one of the worst I've seen in RPGs in a long time. Why did they make that dungeon so long, chat? Why was it so long? Why were there no saves? What were they thinking? It's like actual madness. I'm like, could you imagine? Like, we were in that for like almost 2 hours, no saves. That drives me crazy. So there's just like moments where it's like the good parts of the game are really, really good, and some of the bad parts of the game are really, really bad. I mean, granted, some people might not have as negative of a reaction to the war battles as I did, because that like feels like it's my own personal thing where I talk about in games. There are certain things I never like in games, and I do not like seeing them, and it hit every checkbox. It did everything possible to make me not like it. And I'm like, I don't like that this is mandatory too. So I guess if I had to give a non-spoiler final thought, do I think the game is worth playing? Yes. Did I like the game overall? Yes. Did I hate certain portions of the game? Absolutely. There are some portions where I did genuinely not want to play more Suikoden 5. However, I think on the whole, it was generally a good game. If you can get over the war battles and that final dungeon, I would still probably rate this above the rest of the series. But at the same time, if you're gonna ask, am I gonna replay the game? Even with the extra features at the end of the game, I don't think I would. I think I would replay Suikoden 1 over Suikoden 5. Even if Suikoden 1 didn't have like the craziest story, just game length, unskippable cutscenes, some of those save points, very questionable amounts of time. If you game over, you lose an unfathomably cruel amount of time, in particular that final dungeon. I have to say, I'm really happy I did not mess around beating the game. If we had chosen any other party than the one that we chose, I would have game overed, and I would be saying a very different thing in the final thoughts, that I would not have beaten the game. Although I will also say, again, trying not to spoil too much, but I cannot believe after a no save 2-hour dungeon, you can pick your ending depending on how well you're doing, but then you would have to replay the whole dungeon just to see the other ending, and there's no save points. What were they thinking? Why? Why? Why would they do this? Stupid. Stupid, chat. It's stupid. Don't put multiple endings in your game if you can't make them easy to do, especially if it's just a choice at the end. And I'm not saying that it's only 2 endings at the end. It all depends on how you play the game up to that point. But man, the way we played and we got to the end, I was like, I'm not replaying this. I'm not playing this dungeon again. So yeah, that they definitely had some of the biggest oops compared to the rest of the games in the series. I do think overall, though, I did like it, but as I said before, some of my dislikes were a lot more intense and for a lot longer duration than the other Suikodens. The other ones can kind of get away with it because they were shorter. 3 didn't really get away with that because the game was just really long and unskippable cutscenes was like awful, slow movement. This game, they were a little better with movement, and there are a lot of cutscenes, but I just like them more. It was close to being Rogue Galaxy, I will not lie. I will not lie, if we had game over there, I would have quit. 100%, would not have beaten the game. I absolutely would have rage quit. I would have been like, nope, we're done. I would even put the ending in the playthrough. I'd be like, nope. We're very close to game overing. It was just like, and yeah, like, okay, we'll talk about it more in the rant towards the end. So I guess those are my final non-spoiler thoughts, but I do really want to talk about the ending and other things like that. So stick around, you know, if you're interested in that kind of thing, but that's the general review. So, okay, chat, let's talk some spoiler stuff. I really wish Lim died at the end. I'm gonna be honest with you, chat. I like that one of the endings was to ignore her, because thankfully, she felt like the Nanami of the series, this annoying sister character that basically goes like, big brother! Like, every, 5 minutes, and I'm just like, oh my gosh. Please let this character die. And I'm like, damn, this character's gonna make it to the end, isn't she? Isn't she? Damn it. Of all the characters, chat, I'm like, come on. Please. You killed, all the other characters in the plot over this character. Oh, man. So I guess in terms of... We'll name names and spoil things because, you know, it would be technically a spoiler to do so. The Queen was one of my favorite Insano characters. I think everybody liked the Queen. She just flipped on the everything must burn switch. She was a lot of fun. We collectively didn't like any of the Barrows, but they did their job. I kind of like the foreign army coming in, and they had very distinct personalities as well. Queen Ashtray, basically. I did like the main villain. Not so much his father, but the main villain was kind of nice. But man, oh man, chat, what were they thinking with that final 5 hours of the game? It was just awful. The back-to-back war battles with no saves in between bosses. So you could just war battle, save, boss, war battle, dungeon. Then you have a forced duel, then you can save again. It's just really weird choices. I feel like if this game was made in the modern day where you could save anywhere, some of those problems would get away. Oh, I forgot to say in the main final thoughts. Don't forget, chat, this game can soft lock you. Yeah, oops, I should have put that in the non-spoiler section, but yeah, the game can soft lock you. Don't forget about that, chat. I'm gonna bring it up. That was not okay. The fact that you could save at night in a situation where you can't buy any items, you can't swap your party members, and you can't level, you could just save, you could lock in a party that can't beat the bosses. Yeah, remember the Queen's campaign where you had to choose 3 different teams? Yeah, we could have soft locked there. If I had not made another save and we had not been able to defeat the boss, that would have been a soft lock. So bringing that up again in the final thoughts. I don't think I could get soft locked in the other games. Definitely not like that. I think we can all agree, though, chat, our favorite characters, we had a lot of them in this game compared to the other ones. I think chat will also remember Gun. Not Gun's name, but Gun. Maybe Richard. Chat might remember Richard after the stream is over by name, because of that ridiculous melee damage. Like, what a beast. What an absolute beast. He trains under the waterfall, chat. It's all over. Trained under the waterfall, he's the killing machine. Let's see. Is there anything? I guess, chat, you could put in some of your final thoughts. Feel free to spoil. It doesn't matter. We're past that point. I'm just trying to think. Is there something I didn't mention? We talked about the combat. We talked a little bit about the runes. I liked the rune slot management in this game. Oh, here's one of my biggest complaints. Worst story rune ever. That sun rune is so... Not sun rune, dawn rune. The dawn rune is so bad. They should have thought better about it. That rune was garbage. Like, we literally got, like, the basic lightning rune, and it was better than the dawn rune fully unlocked. Like, that's madness. This is supposed to be, like, an ultra-powerful 1 of 32, and it was just absolute trash. We used it for its offensive ability, I think, twice in the whole game, maybe 3 times if we're being generous. Think about how many times we abused the main character runes in every other game. The answer is we always burn their slots out, no matter what the game was. Not necessarily every single spell level, like the shield rune, for example, in 2. We spam very specific spells, and we loved using them. Or the Soul Reaver rune in 1, where we're just like, oops, I guess we kill everything, GG. Or even some of the true lightning rune in particular in 3, we abused that one big time. But man, 5's was just bad. It was bad. And 4's was already really questionable, where you hurt yourself to deal damage. And it's like, the Dawn rune's like, move over, Condemnation rune. I'm even more trash. Deal with it. Oh, man. Oh, so we talked about characters, the portraits, the plot, the pacing, the dungeons. I have to say overall unlocking the characters wasn't the worst thing ever. Honestly, for a Suikoden game, there were surprisingly low amounts of characters that were ultra obscure. They even have a character to give to you in case you miss an obscure character, which I think might be a first in the series. If you outright miss a character, it gives you a character in return. I know chat like Mediocrity. Chat loved Mediocrity and his little Do-Re-Mi elves. Needs protagonist powers when you have a gun, yeah. I have to say though, Killy was an absolute beast at the end. Him and Cathari, aka Gun, absolute monsters. They were hard carrying everything except for the final boss of the game. And then he who was chosen by the Dawn rune picked she who is unkillable tank. We got through that final boss. So what a combination of things. Yeah, chat, I don't know. Like, I would kind of want to play a bit to see the characters again, but just those war battles are just so hard to get through. Like, maybe if I just go for a normal victory instead of victory plus, I guess it would be okay. But man, I mean, Chow was there when I got, like, the double attacked into double barrage with literally 0 frame counterplay, and the character died. Like, that was pretty BS. And considering characters can die still, it's not a good feeling. So who knows, if we just want to revisit the plot, maybe we'll do an E-Game Plus in the future. And we just pick all of chat's favorite characters. AKA not Princess Lim. Be like, chat, who do you want to see, other than Lim? Yeah, I do feel like the Beavers were a bit underwhelming if I had to say characters that were kind of like mid or bottom tier. Why couldn't they equip certain accessories? I think I get the joke that they had big feet, but like, couldn't they have just let them have like a 4th accessory slot? It would have made them different from the monsters. Oh, I do have to say, the monsters in this game were not good. I will say this, they were not good. Like, you could make monsters decent in 2 to an extent, and they were kind of bad in most of the other games. In this game, they're also pretty bad. It's just like, there's no real reason to use the giant snake or giant turtle if you're playing, unless you're speedrunning, maybe? Can we import the gym teacher? Maybe. Yeah, I think the problem again is they should have let monsters have some items, or again, I think what would have balanced them is if instead of having 3 accessory slots, they just had every single slot as something they can hold. Because it would actually be interesting if they could just hold like 1,000,000 healing items, or they could hold in attack scrolls, or they could hold in a lot of like stat boosting accessories, but not necessarily armor. I think that would have made them more competitive, quote unquote. There wasn't any like mounted combat in this game. Like if we paired the dragon horse with their rider, they didn't like pair up like in the other games, which was a little disappointing. But I think that's all I can really think of, Chad. Is there anything you want to add? I guess the overall movement was fine. Encounter rate was decent. I guess I liked the mini bosses that sometimes popped up. They were frequent enough that I knew they existed, unlike in 3, where I'm like, oh, right, that's a thing, after, like, not seeing one for 20 hours. Yeah, I just feel like some of the monster combinations could have gone a little further. Yeah, we never really had, like, a truly outrageous Unite attack on stream. Just kind of unfair. Oh, yeah, the movement once you had Gun was like, damn, I wish this was the base movement. This would have made the rest of the game kind of fun. Yeah, it's just kind of whatever. So anyway, if Chan has no other thoughts, I guess we'll conclude, because I don't think I have anything else to add to this particular final thought. Were there any abilities that chat thought were useless, or anything else, I guess? Oh, actually, I did forget to talk about one mechanic. We'll put it in there. Dueling. Dueling was actually fair. I was a little shocked, or not shocked, I was a little surprised by the time limit on making your choice, but it did make it feel more like a duel, so I'm not going to say it was, like, out of nowhere. So you did have to think about it a bit more, and I like that there was, like, a clash system if you chose the same thing. Versus both of you just damaging each other. So anyway, Chan, I think we've now taken everything I can think of. Yeah, Do-Re-Mi Elves were also really terrible. Yeah, they were exceptionally bad. They might be the worst series of characters, for sure. That's why I was saying, like, there's only, like, 5 or 6 characters. I was mostly thinking of the Do-Re-Mi Elves and maybe the, 9 characters. Yeah, definitely having the voices, or not the voices, the lines voice is what I meant to say, definitely helped the duel mechanic a lot more. Rather than trying to guess if they were sarcastic or not, you could just hear it, or if they were angry, you could hear it. Yeah, and I do feel like the character models were very expressive, both in the cutscenes and in the duel, for example. So I do think that also sold it. So there is a lot of positive things with the graphics in the game overall, even if it wasn't like the most, like, out of this world art style, but it was just very solid all the way through, and it did what it needed to do. So anyway, chat, I think those are the final thoughts, so I guess we'll be saying goodbye for now for Suikoden V. Who knows, maybe in the far distant future we'll play New Game Plus. Then we don't have to grind, it would just be a straight plot run. Maybe that would actually be decent. Just literally 0 grind. If we keep our levels, which we never got to see, I guess that would mean, yeah, we just kind of cruise through. Although, I'm not sure what kind of items we'll bring over. We'll see, I guess. See Chris changing colors as always. But with that, we're gonna say goodbye to YouTube, and also the soundtrack, sadly. Maybe we'll play the soundtrack when we're in other Be Right Back scenes. But with that, I'm gonna say thank you for watching, YouTube. If you did enjoy the series, we'll be doing another Suikoden game. I'm not sure if it's good or not. We'll try it. So I promise you there'll be at least 1 video. I cannot promise more than 1 video. But for now, we're gonna say thank you for watching, and hopefully see you next series.